Ladies and gentlemen, if you want to understand who a person truly is, don't look at what they say when others are watching. Look at what they whisper to themselves when the world goes silent. Your private thoughts, they are the raw, unedited biography of your life. They reveal your fears, fuel your ambitions, betray your insecurities, and expose your deepest nature long before your actions ever do. And here's the urgency: your thoughts are not passive. They are architects. Every private belief you feed, whether empowering or destructive, is building the person you're becoming. You are right now being shaped by conversations happening inside your mind that no one else can hear. So the question isn't, what do others think of you? The real question is, what are you thinking about you, and where is it taking you? The truth about identity is that it's not shaped in the moments when men stand tall, but in the quiet moments when no one is looking and their inner voice becomes their only companion. Men often carry an unspoken expectation to be unbreakable, to have every answer, to stay composed even when the world is shaking beneath them. In that silence, the thoughts they repeat, "I'm not enough, I must not fail, I need to be stronger," begin carving deep grooves into how they see themselves. And while these thoughts feel private, they dictate the identity they project to everyone around them, often without even realizing it. The challenge is that women, partners, friends, and even colleagues read a man's identity, not by what he declares, but by the energy his inner world leaks into the room. A man who fights himself internally carries a tension others can feel, even if they can't explain it. A man whose private thoughts affirm his value radiates a sense of direction that others instinctively trust. What men think in secret becomes the emotional blueprint of how they love, how they lead, and how they show up in relationships. Because identity is never louder than when it whispers. The most revealing truth about a man's future behavior is that it starts long before he ever takes action. It begins with the conversations he's having with himself when no one else can hear. A man's inner dialogue becomes the rehearsal room where his future choices are practiced, refined, and eventually performed in the real world. When a man repeatedly tells himself he's destined to fail, he unconsciously prepares for failure. When he tells himself he's capable, he starts behaving like someone who expects progress. His inner dialogue becomes a self-fulfilling script, guiding him toward the very outcomes he privately believes he deserves. The impact of this inner narrative becomes even clearer when viewed through the eyes of the people around him, especially women who often sense behavioral patterns before men consciously recognize them. A man who speaks harshly to himself tends to act defensively, withdraw emotionally, or sabotage opportunities. Not because he wants to, but because his mind has already predicted the outcome for him. A man whose inner dialogue is grounded in clarity and self-respect brings a different presence into conversations, relationships, and challenges. Others intuitively respond to the mindset he carries because his thoughts shape the direction of his actions, long before his actions reveal his thoughts. The most dangerous thoughts a man holds are not the loud ones. It's the quiet assumptions he lets go unchallenged. When a man accepts every whisper of doubt, fear, or inadequacy as truth, those thoughts begin to operate like unseen commands shaping his behavior. A single unchallenged belief like, "I'm not good enough," or "I always mess things up," can snowball into habits that limit his ambition, restrict his confidence, and distort his sense of worth. What begins as a private thought becomes an internal rule, and those rules slowly turn into a cage he doesn't even realize he built. The real impact becomes visible in how others interpret the consequences of those unexamined thoughts, especially the women in a man's life who often feel the emotional weight before he acknowledges it. A man who never challenges the mental narratives that diminish him may appear withdrawn, short-tempered, or distant, not because he wants to be, but because he's fighting invisible battles he's convinced himself he cannot win. A man who confronts his thoughts, questions them, and replaces them with healthier truths shows up differently, more open, more grounded, more connected. People can sense when his internal world shifts because his behavior stops being driven by old fears and starts being guided by new awareness. The clearest indicator of the life a man will create is found in the beliefs he carries long before he ever takes a step toward action. A man's internal beliefs act like a lens, shaping how he interprets challenges, opportunities, and even himself. When he believes he's capable, he naturally notices possibilities. When he believes he's destined to fall short, he unconsciously filters out the very chances that could change his life. His beliefs become the architects of his behavior, silently constructing the boundaries of what he thinks is possible, acceptable, or achievable. The effects of these beliefs become even more visible when observed through the reactions of the people around him, especially women who often sense the emotional tone of a man's inner world before he speaks it aloud. A man who believes in his worth carries himself with a quiet confidence that others interpret as strength, stability, and direction. A man who doubts himself sends out a different signal: hesitation, inconsistency, or self-protection, shaping how others respond to him, trust him, or support him. His internal beliefs don't just define his reality. They influence how relationships unfold, how teams follow, and how deeply others are willing to invest in his vision. The greatest struggle a man faces is not against the world around him, but against the unrelenting voice inside his own mind. Every man carries an internal critic that speaks with a confidence it has not earned, a voice that claims authority over his worth, his abilities, and his future. When that voice goes unchecked, it begins to dictate how he moves through life, pushing him to hide his vulnerabilities, shrink his ambitions, or abandon his potential. The battle is often invisible to others, yet it determines whether a man rises with purpose or collapses under pressure he never admits he feels. The weight of this internal conflict becomes even clearer when seen through the perspective of the people who care about him, especially women who are often more attuned to emotional patterns than men realize. A man who is losing the battle within tends to project distance, frustration, or unpredictability, not because he lacks love or effort, but because his mind has become a battlefield where doubt constantly overpowers clarity. The people around him feel the tension long before he recognizes it himself. The turning point emerges when a man begins to understand that mastering his mind is not about silencing his thoughts, but learning to lead them. A man who chooses to confront his mental patterns, questioning the lies, challenging the assumptions, and rewriting the narratives, starts to reclaim control over his identity. His presence shifts, his decisions sharpen, and his relationships deepen because he is no longer reacting to his thoughts, but directing them. The world responds differently to a man who leads from a mind he has learned to discipline. The real transformation in a man's life begins when he realizes that the thoughts he hides from the world are the very ones shaping how he shows up in it. A man's private thoughts, his fears, hopes, insecurities, and quiet ambitions act as the raw material from which his character is formed. When those thoughts are heavy or self-defeating, he carries that weight into every conversation, every challenge, every relationship. But when he learns to harness and refine them, he begins to project a strength that others can feel even before he speaks. The power of this transformation becomes clearer when you consider how closely the people around him interpret the signals his mind creates. Women often pick up on the emotional undercurrents that men try to conceal, sensing when a man is mentally wrestling with doubts or silently questioning his worth. Men, on the other hand, tend to compartmentalize these thoughts, hoping they will stay hidden and harmless. Yet those private thoughts leak through body language, tone, and decisions, influencing how others respond, whether with trust, hesitation, or uncertainty. The shift from private struggle to public strength begins when a man stops letting his unspoken fears dictate his actions and instead turns them into fuel for growth. A man who reframes his internal dialogue from self-criticism to self-coaching starts walking differently, speaking differently, and engaging differently. His confidence doesn't come from pretending to have everything figured out, but from embracing the truth that clarity begins within. The more he aligns his private thoughts with the man he wants to become, the more naturally his behavior begins to reflect purpose and authenticity. The people around him feel this shift immediately. Women experience a man who is emotionally steadier, more open, and more present. Men observe someone who leads with intention rather than impulse. His private thoughts, once a source of quiet struggle, become the foundation of a strength that others can rely on, respect, and draw inspiration from.